Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome into Two Man Game here on Claibs Online. I'm Matthew Roccio. That's Bob Ramsey, and we're here to talk a little basketball here on the podcast. It's going to be a very SLU-centric podcast, obviously, after a rough loss last night to SIUE. Before we jump into that, though, I do have to say hello to my co-host, Bob Ramsey. Rammer, how you doing today?
How are you, Matt? Merry Christmas.
I'm good. The sky was still up there when you woke up this morning?
No, not so much.
Fair enough. Obviously, it was a rough loss by St. Louis at one point. They were up by 18 with 10:47 left. They were up by 16 with 9 left. There's a bunch of different ones. Another one was, they were up 55-37, 18 points with 10:48 to play. It obviously goes very poorly from there. Yeah. Just a rough loss. They were the 14th time they ever played SIUE. They were 12-1. Their only loss coming in the Kiel Auditorium, which I believe is 3 names ago now. Yeah. for that illustrious arena.
Not only 3 names ago, it was a different building.
Yeah, that's true. It was a completely different building as well.
Building. It was Kiel Auditorium, and I think it was the 82-83 season.
Yes,
when, so SIU was Division II.
Yes, a few decades as well. So it was a rough game. So we're going to dive right into it. I'm going to tag a little stuff on at the end from the Drake game, because obviously it's kind of in the past now. It's kind of gotten overshadowed. But there are a couple of things I did want to bring that I'm kind of sprinkling here, because I thought they continued into the SIU game, and I thought that was really interesting. But let's just get into it right off the bat. Obviously, a fairly, I wouldn't even say it was that strong of a game that brought SLU to an 18-point lead. I thought they easily could have been up by 25 at that point if certain shots fall and they don't have a couple bad turnovers. But, let's just get into it. What did you see in those final 11 minutes in essentially the 20-point collapse for the Billikens?
Well, there's big picture stuff and then little picture stuff like I know you'll get into, because you have broken down the film and the play-by-play that I think is fascinating and it'll be fun to get into. But if you want to keep it really simple, you didn't make free throws.
Yeah.
Make free throws, you win. With all the things you did wrong in losing an 18-point lead, the one thing that you didn't do for the second time this year that cost you the game was the easiest thing to do in the game, and that is hit free throws. So the Billikens were 12 of 21. I could go out on the driveway in a blizzard and hit 12 of 21. I'll bet you $100 right now.
And the crazy thing to me is that, again, this is what's crazy about basketball. They were worse in the first half. They were 4 of 7 in the first half, 8 of 12 in the second half. It's just that the 4 missed free throws in the second half all come in the last 4 minutes, and they come in, when we're all focusing on the fact that it's now, a 2-point SLU lead and then a 1-point SIU lead the other way.
And I think I think it's important when we're being critical to lay out kind of what our parameters are. What are the boundaries? To me, I'm not saying, if they hit a meaning, you go 21 of 21. That's unreasonable. But there is what you've been doing as a team average-wise, 83% going into the game. And then what's the low end of acceptable? To me, it's 2 out of 3. That's not very good, but you go, okay, if you make 2 out of every 3, you're at least not, you're not putrid. You know what I mean? And so even if you make 2 more, which would be 2 out of 3, now the game's at least tied. And so I think that's what's really important to kind of get what our parameters are. And if you hit your average number of free throws, you win by 4 or 5 points, even with all the other mistakes, many of which were correctable, which will get into what you're seeing. The other thing I think, and I know we're gonna talk about trends for the last couple of games, and I'm going to throw out some trends for the season. But the guy who many thought you could call as good a shooter as the Billikens have ever had, and maybe even the best, is 2 for his last 15 from beyond the arc, and that's Gibson Jimerson. You won one of the games, but then you lose this other one. I'm not trying to pin it on him.
No.
He's out there busting his tail. But I don't know if you saw in breaking down the film, every one of his shots was short and most of them were flat. For whatever reason, his legs were dead going into the game. I can't explain why. I just know that it was. Is that correctable? In the moment, I don't know that you can correct that.
See, I love that you're looking at things like his shot trajectory and things like that, because I noticed more of the fact that he wasn't less on his shots being flat. And this actually, I mean, it directly correlates to it. I'm being a little ignorant here. So essentially, what I saw consistently in both the Drake game and in the SIU game was he wasn't squaring up and he wasn't getting his feet set before he took off, and he was taking off at weird angles. He was taking off with his front with his right foot ahead of his left foot more than it usually is. He was off balance in the air every time he was taking off, especially on movements and things like that. And so that's what I saw, especially more in the Drake game. But and that's funny because it correlates to something that I thought St. Louis did really well in the Drake game and parts of the SIU game, which was feed Gibson the ball in a bunch of different ways. They started using this set a lot in the Drake game, and they carried it over. And Javonte Perkins actually got a lot of his scoring off of it in the SIU game, where they start him in the corner, they run him through a double screen up to the top of the key, and then he can do a bunch of different things from that. He can also curl around the first screen, he can curl around the second screen, he can flare off the second screen for a shot, and then, or if he flares off the second screen, which is usually with a big man, he can now run a pick and roll with that big man, which he's able to do fairly well most of the time. And so they were giving Gibson a lot of different stuff. I also thought they were utilizing a very active Francis Okoro, a guy who's a very nimble screener out there on the three-point line, which doesn't transfer to his defense on the three-point line. We'll talk about that more later. But they were doing all this stuff where he would run through one Okoro screen, and he would turn around, and Francis would have reset the screen the other way, comes back around. Now he gets the pass from Yuri, and there's an open three. They were doing all these things to get him open that we haven't seen them do, that we've criticized them for not doing consistently this season and sometimes last season, and yet here they are, and he's not hitting the shots, which, I don't think we can criticize the coaching for finally doing it. I think we just say that's just sometimes, the way the game breaks. But really, I mean, he hits 3 or 4 of his threes, and he took 9, he hit 1. One of them was a actual bad shot. 8 of his other threes were either wide open or only about a 50% fair contest from the defensive SIU. Every single other one, that means 6 or 7 of them, if I go through it again, 6 or 7 of them were wide open threes. He hits those. He converts those well over 50%. Sometimes it breaks you that way, though. That's just kind of how the game is.
Well, I think there's something about being off balance. I think there's something about the legs. In fact, there was another. It was in the first half, and by the way, SIU deserves a lot of credit. They really collapsed everything on the baseline and took all those things away. Gibson did get one going right to left for that typical back cut reverse, but he couldn't get up. He couldn't get to the rim to get the reverse. And I think that the explosiveness just wasn't there. So
there was 4 guys in the paint. There were 4 guys in the paint. Yeah. If you just screen capped every time SLU went into the paint, if you just screen capped right as the ball was going up, there were 4 sets of SIUE sneakers in the paint almost every single play the last 10 minutes of the game. They were crashing the living daylights out of the paint, and that should sound familiar. That's what Boise State did. That's what Maryland did. That's what Providence did for a little bit until SLU found a way to work around it. That's what those teams have done to successful points against St. Louis. Now it's St. Louis and Travis Ford, the coaching staff's job, to figure out how to work around that, especially because it keeps coming up late in games.
Absolutely right. Yeah, I can't add anything more to that. I think you're right about that. You got to figure it out. It might be time to start trying some new things with personnel and rotations.
Yeah. So big credit to SIUE, but again, the counter has to be there from St. Louis, and that kind of brings me into one of the things we wanted to talk about, which was some of the things we saw, just that we're looking like outliers, things every once in a while, things that need to be cleaned up, that have started to turn, unfortunately, into consistent things we're seeing throughout game by game trends, essentially outliers to trends. Kind of is what we've seen here, St. Louis, that contributes to them, losing 3 out of their last 4 games. What are the big ones that you've seen, Bob Ramsey?
Well, this is a really strange team.
Yeah.
They shoot 83% from the free throw line as a team, yet, which is, by the way, cosign for our viewers that don't get into the nuts and bolts and dive deep into it. That's remarkable. That's off the charts. That's great free throw shooting as a team, right? You agree?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think they were top 10 at one point in the nation. I'm not sure exactly what it is.
Yet they've lost 2 games because of bad free throw shooting.
Yes.
It blows my mind. I'm gonna take blame. Part of it. I'm gonna have to take blame. I want to be the person taking the blame. I know people think I'm a hype guy for St. Louis U. I want them to win, but I try to be honest in my praise. I've never misjudged a team more than I've misjudged this team in 40 years of Division I basketball. And here's why. I know people thought it was hype. I really thought this was going to be as good a shooting team as, and this predates you, the Waldman, Claggett, Highmark group.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just not.
Yeah. I mean, they're 268th in the country right now at 3-point shooting and 256th in 2-point.
They're under 33%.
Yeah.
33% is not good. I call that the low end of acceptable. Mm-hmm. You got to make 1 of 3.
Yeah.
And they're just not. Are there some bright spots? Could it change? It still won't change what we think about the whole season, because what has happened counts. You know what I mean? This all counts when you go into the evaluation, the end of next March into April, and we look back and evaluate the whole team. The beginning that has been so-so, it counts. So where do you go from there? One thing that I do want to talk about, I don't want to let positives go by the wayside, because that's not fair. And that is Javonte Perkins looked like the JP Smoove of old. He was truly remarkable. And he's had a good game against Drake and a tremendous game against SIUE. That's a real positive note that should not, and for all the naysayers, and I don't blame you for saying nay, but for all the naysayers, you can't disregard that, because that is a huge bright spot. Travis Ford said he's got to play him more. He's got to trust him more. He's got to give him more confidence. And I think there's a direct correlation to that and what we saw last night.
Yeah, and the big thing, I think the difference was Javonte made it happen by just kind of being a spot-up shooter and being kind of the third outlet in the play against Drake. The difference was in that those same plays that were so heavy on Gibson Jimerson in the Drake game, he just straight up put Javonte in the Gibson spot on those plays 7, 8, 9 times against SIUE, and he scored those two curling pull-up jumpers he hit. Both of those are on that play set. And then he hit a bunch of those deep threes. A couple of them was trailing in transition. A couple of them were just kind of off a little bit of a broken play. He obviously has the jumper there, but him hitting those pull-up jumpers I thought was huge. And then obviously that rip play that kind of started his night off where he has the rip step over between 2 guys and then he finishes through contact. Anytime you see him do that, it was a little scary there because he looked like he got a little banged up and he had to go to the bench for a little bit. But then obviously comes out and starts hitting some threes. But I do want to ask you, he only has 1 shot the last 5 minutes of the game. And I really do want to get into the last 5 minutes because going through all those things, all that beautiful movement, all those things I'm talking about, these great plays where they're running Gibson through double screens, they're running JP through double screens, they're giving them options where they can cut through either screen, they can curl, they can shoot. It was mostly absent in about the 15 possessions of the last 5 minutes. There was about 3 good called plays. And I understand Travis wants them to play more of their flow offense, but clearly I think you saw in the Drake game and you saw early against SIUE, when they were calling those plays and they were getting those picks set up and guys were moving through the paint because that's what the play dictates, the offense was rolling a little bit better. And I think we saw an absence of that. We saw a lot of pick and roll. We saw a lot of Yuri Collins drives. And I thought while he didn't make a couple of the best decisions, he had 2 ridiculous finishes in paint and through guys,
Mm-hmm.
while also having to deal with multiple possessions where there wasn't enough movement. There was one that I think people are criticizing for there being no movement where Yuri did rush the play. But all in all, I mean, the guy's the backbone of the offense, and I don't think him being aggressive towards the rim is the biggest issue with the St. Louis offense in the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, you unpacked a lot there, and I think your play-by-play would tell you more. Did you miss the shots from Perkins late? Yes. I'd want to go through the play-by-play with you and see if we could figure out why. At what point was he open? Where was Yuri with the ball? What was the defense taking away? I think those are things that are really critical when we're being and important. And we're talking about the last, 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I think let's figure out why. And I'll tell and one other thing, because I know colleagues of ours in the media and a lot of fans, well, he didn't get a shot in the last 10 minutes. We'll figure out why. One of the reasons overarching is A, being banged up, but there's three things. B, if you're not a good defensive player and things are leaking defensively,
mm-hmm.
that's how do you reconcile that as the head coach? And now I just forgot what my third thing was. But anyway, let's get into it. And I think that'll open up the eyes of a lot of people as to figure out it's okay. Hey, team stinks, get rid of everybody, but let's figure out why. And then maybe that'll support a critic's judgment, or maybe it'll make some people think.
I love that you mentioned that because it was interesting. Francis Okoro missed 2 free throws. It's tied 66-66. He puts Javonte Perkins back into the game. They run a specific play set they had run twice earlier that game. SIU defends it the third different way. The first way they defended it, they got burned for Javonte Perkins 3. The second way they defended it, they let up a drive that didn't score, but it was a better drive. Then they defended it a third different way after seeing it a third time. And it completely shut down. SLU didn't get a good play out of it. And
okay.
I think that was the one where the strong side guy came out hard on Yuri and they got a foul call. Yuri goes 1 of 2. So then they take Javonte Perkins back out. Thatch is in there. Hargrove's in there for defense. So I think you're 100% right that the back and forth of Javonte, they were literally playing that game where if it was the ball starting for the Billikens in the offensive zone, it was, Javante's in. If it's going to be a defensive possession, Javante's out. Because as soon as they go in and get the foul called, Javante's in there so that when they miss the foul, he's in there for the last play. I know a lot of people are criticizing the last play, but again, I think this goes back to the kind of the thing we always joke about, that they's on scholarship too. The SIU saw a play that worked well for SLU, adapted once after getting burned, and then adapted a second time even better. And I thought that was actually a great job that shows you how another coach is adapting. But at the same time, I also love the ingenuity. It was the same play or similar play that Travis used at the end of the Drake game to get that winning bucket. And I always refer to it. I always nerd out about it. It's a Spain pick and roll. If you don't know what it is, it's very simple. You set up a regular pick and roll, and then a guy sneaks behind you to screen your roll man screener. And St. Louis used it to great effect to win the Drake game. I loved the play call. I wasn't at the game, and I thought it was actually kind of personally insulting that Travis would use that play call right when I'm not there. I'm like, Travis, I've been talking about this play for years, and you're going to call it to win a game when I'm not there? How dare you? He didn't want me to ask the question. He didn't want me to ask the question in the post game. That's what I'm convinced. But then they go to the play set multiple times using Javonte Perkins instead of Gibson Jimerson in the same role where he kind of sneaks behind and they run the play. Again, Javonte Perkins gets a wide open 3 early on in the game, and then they kind of work their way around it. So I thought there was some good calls by the coaching staff. I thought it was a good move by Travis to kind of move Javonte around with the defense and the offensive possessions. But at the same time, I do think maybe that could be part of the reason why the rhythm isn't there and he doesn't get involved in the last 5 minutes. But again, that's the trade-off you have to make as a coach. And that if we want to talk about results, fine. If we want to talk about process, which is all I really give a damn about, that's not a bad way to go about it. Even if the guy's having a hot game, and people are going to disagree, but in my opinion, I understand playing the roles in that situation.
Yeah. Now, the alternative is if all your guys are making shots like they're supposed to, I thought this was going to be, as a team, an upper 30% 3-point shooting team.
Yeah.
And I thought it was going to be a team that was going to score in the 80s and even in the 90s every night. If you're that good, maybe you don't have to worry about the defense. We're going to outscore you, and we're going to leave our guys in, and you can't keep up with us. But guess what? They're not making the shots.
And it's inexplicable because I honestly think these two games they did a great job of getting their shooters open.
Agreed.
And I think there's been plenty of games where we've been like, why aren't you just scheming more things up to get these shooters shots? And yet here they are doing it and it's not working. That's backwards. That
right.
doesn't make any sense. Gibson's finally taking open shots and he doesn't make it. I know it's an old basketball joke. The wide open ones are the hardest ones to make, but that's why it's a joke.
That's exactly right. Well said.
That's why it's a joke, because it's not freaking true.
In fact, if anybody who's ever listened to Earl and me on the radio over the decades, that's the one thing we talk about. You got to make the open shots.
Mm-hmm.
The ones you're driving and a guy's hanging on you, or it's a spinning fadeaway and all those kinds of things where you're well defended. Hey, you make some, you don't make some. We get it. Maybe, be smart, good shot selection, but you got to make the open shots. You got to make layups, and you got to make free throws. In fact, my old partner, Kevin Slayton, always used to say, he's a great basketball guy. He always used to say, make layups and free throws, you'll win almost every game.
And that's been SLU's problem in their big losses, and it's not shocking that it kind of came up again. Again, I think I've heard, people out there are angry, about the coaching right now, and people are angry about the officiating. And I got some texts from people who were saying, where's Travis at this point? And my thing is, it was a bad loss. There's no doubt about it. But I've watched a lot of badly coached, just X's and O's basketball, just like teams that have no defensive scheme, no defensive effort, no offensive scheme, just zero ingenuity, nothing. I would not put that label on this SLU team and this SLU coaching in any way, shape, or form. I think there's some questions that I haven't 100% figured out, and I guess this brings me to some of the post-game comments, where there seems to be a little disagreement between the team leader in the room and the on-the-court leader, if you will, in that Travis thinks there's some chemistry issues right now. He goes back to the kind of the lack of a vocal player. Yuri seems to think it's just more of a lack of just, people being able, people playing at 100%, cohesiveness, more like mentally, and just like there's mental brain farts and people are tired. And so they're missing assignments and missing little parts of the play. Do you see any balance between those two takes from Yuri and Travis right now?
I don't, except that I can understand where both of those individuals would feel the way they do. In particular, Yuri, he's out there. He's cool and calm. Mm-hmm. He knows the offense. He knows his teammates. So to him, because of who he is as a person and who he is as a player, it's all good, right? He doesn't need a guy pumping him up and saying, let's get together and understand. So put yourself, folks, looking through his eyes. To him, what are you talking about? We're fine out there. But from the coach, he sees a breakdown. He'll see guys occasionally standing and watching. And so often watching Yuri instead of working while he's working. To me, that's the thing I see, without giving you any specific examples. But occasionally when the chips are down, you'll see Yuri trying to work magic, and everybody's kind of standing and waiting to see what's going to happen instead of continuing to move and be an aid to Yuri as he tries to create. That's a little bit almost basketball mystical. The main thing you don't ever want to do, though, is stand and watch. No matter what's going on the court, in general terms, it's rarely a good idea to be standing still, right? Would you agree with that?
Amen. Yeah, I would agree. And talk about standing still. Do you there's so many veterans on this team. There's so many guys who've been playing for so long. They might be listed as redshirt sophomores, but they sure as hell are not. Half of them are like doctors at this point. Do you think there's a level of senioritis kind of maybe hitting some of the older guys where it's not complacency, but and maybe not even stagnation? Those might be maybe too harsh of terms, but just something where there's a wall right now, and maybe conference play is the thing that kind of shocks them out of it.
Now we're stepping really far back and taking a look at not only the Billikens, but as a representative of a philosophical point that may be a byproduct of COVID year, and transfer portal. And that is multiple teams with multiple 5 and 6 year players and 24 and 25-year-old men, not kids anymore, 24 and 25-year-old men. And that same rah, get one for the Gipper when you're 24 and 25 doesn't resonate quite as much for some people.
No.
Let me give you an example for some of the hardcore folks like you and I. Why wasn't Richmond dominating the league the last couple of years? They had a group of players that all came in together, played 5 years together. In those first couple of years were dynamite. Same guys that grew older together. They as a group, they didn't ascend anymore after like that second year. And it doesn't help matters to say, is that happening with the Billikens? Could we find other teams like that? I don't know. It's just something that I've been noodling on a little bit, because it may be the second time in the same league that I've seen something like this.
Yeah, that's definitely something I'm going to have to keep in the back of my mind, because that's, like you said, there is something, like you said, kind of hard to grasp on this team of where the struggles are coming from. And that's
two different ways. If you're in that situation, pardon my interruption, if you're in that interruption, if you're in that situation, one, this is our last hurrah. Let's go out and kill it. Then we're all leaving at the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
I got to get my shots. I got to show I can score. I got to, and I'm thinking about my NIL and it's not I don't believe it's a conscious thing. Nobody would do that consciously.
No.
But subconsciously, it's easy to understand if you got to that point.
But it's funny you say that, because on yesterday morning before the game, Travis joined Carey and Randy Carricker on the opening drive on 101 ESPN, and they asked him a comment about how much X's and O's coaching do you have to do as opposed to all the other aspects of being a college coach, and he's like, yeah, there's a lot of other stuff, and it's a lot of talking to the guys, it's a lot of understanding it, and that answer was a lot in relation to his talk and meeting with Javonte Perkins. Clearly, I think that meeting went very well, and clearly he was able to find a spark for Javonte, and for him it was getting out. Travis was getting out of his own way, and so as much as I've criticized him over the last few years with his X's and O's, this is one of those other things where now I think the other aspects of coaching, has to come into play, and maybe this isn't an X's and O's thing that's holding this team back, and it is, and I think maybe that difference in how Travis is seeing it and how Yuri is seeing it, and how you're saying it, and that senioritis aspect, I think there's a good chance we're at least around what the issue is at this team, which is just it's more mental than it is physical, and that's a tough thing for a team to figure out. But the good thing is, if a team can figure it out, you can see a change palpably on the court, because again, I do think the on the court talent, the on the court coaching is where it needs to be, even though maybe the mental aspects of the team isn't at 100%.
Now, one other thing, and this comes from me as a lineup nerd guy, but I think we can address the torch and pitchfork people who are demanding change right now. I'm wondering if the 200 minutes maybe needs to be divided a little more.
Oh,
and by the way,
yeah, I know, I love that. I love that point.
The people
that brought that up.
By the way, the people that said, "How can you sit Javonte Perkins out?" He played almost 28 minutes.
Yeah.
How many minutes do you want a guy to play?
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
They actually
played really good in the non-Yuri minutes.
And Yuri played almost 36 minutes. And but what I am looking for, and maybe it's just because I think the world of the young man and I know what he did in junior college, and I see it in practice every day.
Loved his game.
And
Loved his game on Wednesday. I'll say that right now.
I think they got to
Loved
find
it.
a way to at least double and maybe triple and quadruple Sincere Parker's minutes.
Yes.
People say, yeah, let's do that. Let's do it. Rammer, you're right. Who do we take minutes from? You got 200 minutes, folks.
Yeah.
Sit down. I'm asking everybody watching, take the roster and sit down. You got 200 minutes, divide them up, and let me know what you think.
And by the way, you have to give at least like 38 of them to Francis Okoro and Jake Forrester. Like and you have to give 36 of them to Yuri, I think.
Hey, I as you know, I'm not a believer in basketball plus minus. I think it's so it just doesn't dive deep enough. It's just not a very good stat like it is in hockey.
I agree.
And even in hockey, it's flawed.
Yeah, it is.
But Terrence Hargrove
loved it. Yes, I thought. Yes, I love the way he's been playing. He would have been one of the biggest things I wanted to talk about if we just would have done a Drake episode. I loved it. He had a couple of great defensive plays, and a good dunk in transition against SIUE.
So Okoro's in foul trouble, and this is not a shot at Jake Forrester, tied for the team lead in rebounds, 4 of 7 from the floor.
Yeah, he had a great game.
Fine, but are there going to be more times that you have to look and play without a center?
Yeah, I would be okay with that too. Yeah.
Play small and athletic.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Also, one of the things, and this is not me kissing up, this is just something I wanted to bring up because I was impressed by how much better their one-on-one defense was on the perimeter throughout the first 30 minutes of the game against SIUE. Multiple times we saw Yuri Collins get his hands on the ball. Multiple times I thought we saw Javante Perkins give a lot better effort defensively. And then right out of the gate, second half early, and then late in the second half when things start falling apart, bunch of dribble drives that just get right past them. And I think it kind of speaks to your thing. The talent's there. Everyone's a little bit less on the legs later in the game. There's an effort factor. There was one play that Javon Pickett where he has an angle. He can just cut the drive off at the free throw line, and he just chases the guy out to the 3-point line, and then the guy breezes right past him. And it's a mental mistake.
Yeah.
Combined with maybe not the best effort 100%. This team can defend better. They have defended better over the last 6-7 games, but it unfortunately has just also it combines with the bad mental lapses at the worst probable times, and the offense unfortunately not like you said shooting the way it needs to. But again, the defense can be better, and that's a bigger thing for me. Trying not to get too bogged down in the fact that this is this is a rough non-conference schedule. It's only the second time in Travis Ford's St. Louis career that he's lost 5 non-conference games. This is the first time since his second season at St. Louis. So it's a bad run. But if you're trying to pull up positives and say, can you put together a run throughout the A-10 schedule? The fact is, if the effort is there, the defense is better. And if the offense at any point returns to the shooting level we expected it to, which I don't think is completely ridiculous, then they're back to where we expected them preseason going into this. Going into the conference schedule. But again, those things have to continue, and they're not just gimmies.
We've got 10 days to gnash our teeth and wring our hands, but I think more productively figure out where does the team need to be. I think that, an initial reaction, well, we got to run the table in the league. Well, no, not really, but you do got to win most of your games to set you up the double bye in the league turn. It's weird to be thinking about March already, but what's the conference schedule mean to you and mean in postseason? Your clear goal, really for every team's got to be to make the NCAA tournament. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that the league is strong enough, even if you ran the table, to give you enough of a resume for an at-large bid. I don't think so. I don't know what you think.
No, the A-10s didn't put together a collectively good enough non-conference schedule to boost anybody that these wins become markedly better.
So figure out, almost start from scratch. Forget what your rotations were and who was doing what. What's going to help us be at our best when March comes around. And if we have to change roles and whatever, I don't even know what it would be, but now is the time to figure that out. Go back to the drawing board. Really take a hard look at what you believed about this team from August and the Europe trip through last night. What did you believe about the team? What is true? What is not true in those beliefs? And then how do we maximize what we have? Because we have data now, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have data. How do we maximize what we have on this team to achieve in March?
Rammer, one quick thing here before we go. We got a question from West Pine Bills on Twitter, one of our good friends who also covers the Billikens, does a great job up there in Chicago. What one change would you make that could go the longest way the rest of the season? And I think we've answered that. I think my answer would have to be the shooting returns to the level that it was at last year with a very similar roster, plus a healthy Javonte Perkins and a sincere Parker. So, I mean, just the shooting returns to what we expect it to be. I think that has to be my answer.
Well, Perkins his shot is returned.
Yes.
I mean, it's a beautiful thing. We have to assume there is no other explanation that it's just a horrible slump for Jimerson, right?
Yeah.
He's too good to go 1 for 9, 1 for 9, 1 for 9 the rest of his career. That's not going to happen.
And if
right?
they are a 38% team like we talked about preseason, I mean, a lot of games that we've talked about look completely different.
That's exactly right. And then there's a third thing with shooting, and that's adding Sincere Parker. And I wonder if to the Midtown guys, and it's more of a question than an answer, because I don't know what the results would be. Maybe it's got to be a look at playing smaller more and absolutely saying you can't outscore us. Yeah, you're going to score, but you can't outscore us, because I don't think this team can win trying to hold teams to 55 points a night.
No, and man, I have so much damn stuff. This is my last thing. I promise, Raymond. Thank you so much for indulging me here. I do think the defense. I'm interested to see how that changes, because I think they've adapted this super heavy and super extreme, like heavy help. Not even a lot of switching, just a really heavy helping, and then sometimes over helping, and then that causes a switch kind of scheme. And I think maybe dialing it back a little bit is probably the best thing to go forward. And I wonder if we see that. I just think that it leads to too many easy shots because of overcommits. And I think that I understand that they're trying, I think, to maybe overcome some of the defensive lack on certain players and accentuate the defensive strengths of other players. But I think it's not letting the other players like Fred Thatch or Terrence Hargrove, it's not letting them attack the way you would want it to, and then it's overexposing some of the weaker defensive players. And I wonder if maybe we see a more conservative system from SLU going forward. I don't know if you've noticed any of those things over the last few games.
I can't say I have specifically, but I think, for a team that's sort of at a crossroads here at the end of non-conference season, I think all those conversations should be on the table, and they should be. And I promise you, the coaching staff's already discussing everything. And what you just hope is, like I say, to flush out what they believe to be true about the team, their philosophy, the personnel, and their rotations and expectations. Flush all that out. Say, okay, we have the data now. What have we learned? Let's look specifically at what works and what doesn't work. Let's take this machine apart, put it back together, and maximize what we can do in conference play.
It's going to be a very interesting, I guess, isn't it the 31st? It's New Year's Eve, right?
Yeah.
Am I crazy?
New Year's Eve, high noon Central Time at St. Joe's.
There it is, high noon Central Time at St. Joe's. We got 9 days before then. You'll hear from the two-man game before that, but we do want to wish everybody a happy holidays this weekend. It's obviously getting a little crazy here if you are in St. Louis, or really if you're anywhere in the Midwest or the North in the United States. Please stay warm, stay safe this holiday weekend. We'll be back talking more baseball on the two-man game. Before we go, though, Raymer, please tell them about our friends at Royal Banks of Missouri.
Royal Banks of Missouri, they do so many things year-round. They do their toy drives, and they're always trying to find ways to help their clients, their customers. They look at them as partners, help them out year around. But I just tell you, think about what you want in service in any business you're in, and in a business especially that involves your money. Service is very, very important, and Royal Banks has been doing it and doing it great for 60 years in the metro area and expanding now to Northeast Missouri as well. It's Royal Banks, where better service means better banking.
Rammer will be back after Christmas. Obviously, Christmas brings us a great NBA slate. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And I got a bunch more St. Louis basketball that I'm going to watch and nerd out about. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. So thank you so much for joining me today, Rammer, for this extra long podcast. Again, happy holidays and Merry Christmas to you and yours. Stay safe, stay warm. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Rocc. My Christmas present is doing the two-man game with you. Appreciate it.
You're too sweet, Rammer. Thank you so much, sir. Again, happy holidays, everybody out there. Thank you so much, St. Louis. Have a great rest of your day.
As one of St. Louis's largest veteran-owned companies, St. Louis Acura knows what it means to serve. As we head into the holiday season, St. Louis Acura is collecting Toys for Tots for the United States Marine Corps and a clothing drive for local military charities and churches. Each donation can earn a gift from our boutique or a discount on a vehicle service or car wash. Please help us help others this holiday season, and thank you for helping St. Louis Acura become one of the area's top 50 fastest growing businesses for 2021.